Welcome to Foreignness and Friendship, a series of podcasts. We present a number of bonus tracks connected to our radio show. You can listen to conversations with artists and activists, reports from festivals and other larger events, essays, reviews, poetry, and letters. We see ourselves as part of a non-binary rebellion with the intention of creating a language and a human condition beyond race, ethnicity, gender, sex, and class. Tear down these walls, dismantle the statues of power, and meet the other with an open spirit. Here follows a conversation with Karen Jennings from South Africa. She writes about solitude and about people who are alone and feeling lost. It has not been a conscious choice from her side, but it is simply how her books have come out. Maybe it is also a reflection of the author's situation and context as an artist who always works alone. Her most recent book is called Crooked Seed. Previously, she has published several other novels. There is a striking reason behind our choice of having a conversation with Karen Jennings. When we saw her name in the program of Open Book Festival this year, we thought she was someone else. We confused Karen Jennings with Melissa Sussens. They are two very different authors. Melissa Sussens is a poet and Karen Jennings is a novelist. We did not notice the mistake before we had already made an appointment with Karen Jennings. At no point we dared to admit this confusion, but decided silently to proceed as if nothing irregular had occurred. I'm mostly going to talk about I'm very fascinated about this loneliness idea and the author and how this is kind of influencing the way we write. I have to admit that I only encountered your books here, so I hadn't read them full. So it will be we will touch generally about the books also, and this setting in your latest books, Crooked Seed, which I find interesting concept with this future. Then I will start asking you to present yourself. I always do that. I ask the one I'm talking to introduce themselves in the way that you would like to be introduced. So I'll just make a short entry here. We are at Open Book Festival still in Cape Town, South Africa, and we are meeting here with Karen Jennings. Jennings. It is Jennings, actually. Yes. And if you can please introduce yourself as you would like to be introduced.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Karen Jennings, and I'm very excited to be speaking to an audience of Danish people because I'm named after Karen Blixen, and so my whole life people always tend to pronounce my name as Karen, and so when I did go to Denmark several years ago, I thought at last people will pronounce my name correctly, but then they told me it's actually pronounced Karen or something weird like that in Denmark.
Karen, I think.
Oh, okay.
You do it in Danish.
Oh, okay.
But the funny thing is that with Blixen, that's of course she spent some time in Kenya.
Yes.
And the place in Kenya where she used to live is of course pronounced Karen.
Oh.
Because that is the English pronunciation.
Oh, so I think that's the curse that Karen is just going to become Karen all the time. But anyway, so yes, I'm Karen Jennings, and I am a writer from Cape Town. And I am also someone who's been at university for about 20 years. I've never left. I just do degree after degree or project after project. And at the moment, I'm at the University of Stellenbosch, where I'm part of LEAP, which stands for the Laboratory for the Economics of Africa's Past, where they do a lot of research into the Cape history and also slavery, how people were living here, a true account of how all the various people were living here. So I'm very much interested in our history, our very complicated history.
Yeah, because there's always this discussion in South Africa about who was here originally. And
yeah.
If I try to discuss it with people in South Africa, every time I give a new definition about the original people on the Cape.
Yes.
So it's kind of difficult to figure out.
Yes, and
coming from the outside, what is really going on with this heritage on the Cape?
I think it is very complicated, and because we have so many different groups and cultures in South Africa, so different people, they want to tell their version of the story. But there were indigenous tribes that were living here, and then when the Portuguese came first, but they didn't settle here. But then when the Dutch came and settled, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the Dutch did not enslave the local people in South Africa. They went to the east and also to Mauritius, Madagascar, further north in Africa, and got their slaves from there. So then they were never enslaved. The indigenous people of South Africa were never enslaved. That doesn't mean they were treated well, but they weren't enslaved. They were later on sort of forced into servitude, which is basically slavery. But I think there's a lot of confusion about that in South Africa, about who had a slave past and who didn't, and where they came from.
Yeah, and that is actually something I think that is also haunting various parts of the continent at large, because what are we discussing? It is like we have this colonial construction of that everybody was enslaved, and then we are talking about it as a simple entity.
Yes.
But if you go down in these histories around also not only here but also in the western part and eastern part of the continent, then there's all kind of different specific stories of where did the slaves come from,
yes.
where they were taken, and when then they eventually, only some of them was transported on the other side of the Atlantic.
Yes.
While there was other parts of the continent where it was another case.
Yes.
Where it was a relationship to the east mostly. And I think down here in South Africa it was a relationship to the east. There came a lot of people
yes.
who then is part of this construction of the colored
yes,
group,
the colored,
which is still
yes.
confusing me, because some people will define the colored group as the original people on the Cape, but other people will also mix these mixed race, which was a mixed race of whites and the slaves from Malaysia and all the kind of from that part of Asia.
Yes, it is a very, very complicated topic, because colored identity, the word colored and being classified as colored, that's really an apartheid construct. There were ideas, they used the word hundreds of years ago here, but it wasn't quite in that same way where that's all you had to identify yourself as. In fact, they used to identify slaves by, the island they came from. So they would be September van Boegies from this island of, and from Batavia or wherever it was they were from. And then later on, it just became classified as colored, which was a catch-all term for children of any kind of mixed race, any combination. And I think that's why it's very complicated for people now, because they have certain, depending on maybe what their direct history is. So they can say, well, I had an Indian great-grandfather and a Xhosa other great-grandfather, so that's all there is. But then there'll be so much more and then all the different countries of Europe thrown in. So
It's very complicated.
Very
Yeah.
complicated.
So that's
yeah.
very complicated. I mean, still, of course, racial separation and
Yes.
way of
And there are people that really embrace colored identity, and then there are others who feel that it's something that doesn't exist because there is no one identity. So it is very complicated, and I think it's something that can't really be resolved. I think it's each individual will decide for themselves.
Yeah, there was actually at this festival last year. There was two authors who had written about this the colored culture.
Yeah.
They call it in an attempt, I think, to try to discuss on an academic level how can we talk about that, because
Yeah.
it's not only this racial heritage, but it has also become some kind of a culture because people have defined themselves in
Yes.
that way. So there's this need of not just being in between white and black, but also being something in
Yes.
itself. Must be.
Yes, I know that book. I own it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it's on my list of books to read because I think it's a very valuable book, and I'm interested to see what they have to say. Yeah.
You have written a number of books, and they somehow, I learned earlier today when you had a session in the book lounge, that they are all kind of focusing somehow on loneliness, or people who are lonely, or at least when loneliness kind of play an important role. And what is can you say something about what is loneliness kind of? Is it when we see loneliness in literature, is it often a reflection of that the author itself, we as writers and authors, are somehow alone, and a lot of artists are somehow alone in their life, and then the expression of loneliness comes through this art form, which is in your case literature. How much is it a reflection of that, and how much is it also because maybe loneliness is also an existential fact that fascinates a lot of us?
Yes.
Because I guess everybody is alone. Maybe some of us feel more alone than others, but what is it that is? Do you think there's something specifically inspiring about loneliness, or
Well,
where's the motive, or where's the attraction of?
I'm not sure.
Or maybe it's not an attraction. Maybe it's just a.
I don't know that. So yes, I find solitude or being alone very attractive because that is my personality. I've always been that way. Whereas my mother, for example, she just talks and talks and talks. She needs to talk all day to people, and I'm currently living with my mother, and I have to say to her, please, I can't take it any longer. Just be quiet for a little bit. I just need to be quiet. And so I do think it's a personality thing, but I think also we do see it very prevalent in artistic types. So, writers, musicians, artists, poets, all the people who are, for whatever reason, they feel very deeply. And I think that there is a sense of a disconnect with the world where they feel it immensely, but they're not quite able to express that in normal communion with others, and that's why they're looking for other means of expression, so through poetry or music or artwork or whatever it is. And I did also see a video on YouTube that by a psychiatrist who said that most artistic types are highly intelligent, and so imagine, so if you take as ordinary intelligence, let's say an IQ of 100, I don't know if that's normal, but let's just say that, and let's say mentally starting to go on the lower end of the scale, let's say that's at 70, and let's say very intelligent is 130. So he explained that someone with an IQ of 130 talking to someone with an IQ of 100 is the same as someone with an IQ of 100 talking to someone with an IQ of 70. So it's a real struggle to find a way to communicate because you're just not on the same level. Now, you know, I know IQ, it's all very up in the air and all that, but I do think that it is part of this problem of communication. And I've always looked at people and thought, how do they know so easily how to interact and what are they saying to each other? Is there some password or code or something? Why don't I know it? And I'm at a time in my life now, I'm 42 or about to be 42, not quite 42, but where I feel like I know who I am and I'm okay with that. But you know, when you're a teenager and you see all the rest of the world, they love going out and getting drunk and all that stuff, and that never appealed to me. I didn't want to go clubbing and just have all that noise and chaos. And okay, I did it sometimes, and sometimes I had fun, but it wasn't something I really wanted all the time. I'm much happier at home reading a book. I don't even like to watch TV. I feel like it's too many people talking at the same time. So I think, for a long time I have felt, what's wrong with me? Why? What's broken in me? What's wrong with me? But I've just come to accept that I am the way I am. There are many other people like me, and the reason why we don't connect is because we're all hiding away.
No, sometimes I feel that I have the best conversations with my artists, with my painters friends or other poets and writers and musicians. And I've thought about that it is a little bit, if you tell it publicly that you are not really interested in talking to people who are not doing some kind of art, then it can seem a little bit arrogant.
Yes.
But I think there's a point anyway, because I often have the feeling that then I can somehow relax. I don't have to explain so much, and I definitely don't have to defend myself in that
Yes.
way, which is often the case. Or not defend, but I know that I will not be attacked for what I'm doing.
Yes.
So there is this kind of mutual maybe acceptance, and there's also kind of some kind of, and I'm not saying harmony, but there's a situation of communication which is is easier somehow.
Yeah.
And then you will also get into a conversation which is maybe inspiring for yourself or something, where often I can feel that if I talk to other people, it's a bit strange way of calling them that, but then there can be some kind of exhaustion because I don't really get anything. I feel that I give more than I get, so to speak.
Yes.
So there's, I think, your concept of the intelligence was actually illustrative of that thing, because it's about, are you on the same level or in the same context?
Yes, and coming from the same same background or the same basic ideas, having a conversation with someone who, you can have a great conversation with someone who has the same basic instincts or feelings as you, even if you don't speak the same language and you only know a few words, whereas you can be fully fluent with someone else and the conversation you just think, I don't even know what you're talking about. My sister, for example, she's 2 years older than I am, and she's very into science and maths and all of that. And I think, we don't hate each other, but it's very difficult to have a conversation because there's no way of connecting. We just are, it's like strangers trying to reach out to each other, but we just can't manage,
I remember recently my mother said to me, but it's also very complicated because you live a life who is very different.
Yes.
But on the literary level, my life is not very complicated because it contains of books and podcasts, and I mean, it is not very complicated to understand. But still, apparently, she feels that it is a bit. She doesn't know what to ask me or what to talk to me about somehow, and then she finds something which is maybe not something which is very important for me, but it is something that she can ask me about.
Okay.
So we have a conversation, but it was just I just found it striking that she said that, and I think she didn't really think about what she was saying on that occasion, but it was an expression of something who was who she felt frustrating apparently, and that is maybe also a reflection of how do we deal with if we talk to people who we don't have a direct connection with, or we don't have so much in common.
Yes, and I was married for, I actually don't know how many years, 7, 8, 9, 10, I don't know, however many years. And I think that was a big problem in my marriage, that we were two very different people, and sometimes that can work, but in this case it really didn't work. And so it's not that he's a bad person or I'm a bad person, we weren't able to
to get that kind of mutual communication or understanding.
And my mom said to me the other day, you're never going to find another husband because no one is going to accept you the way you are. You either have to change or stay single. So I said, I'll stay single, that's fine.
Yeah, but that is maybe also a mother's kind of a little bit weird way of caring or something.
But I think my mom is very forward-thinking in some ways, and like a feminist, but in other ways she's quite conservative. She still has this idea that a woman needs a husband to look after her. Even though my dad, they had a very happy marriage, but he didn't financially look after her. She had her own job. They were both independent individuals of their own. So I don't know why. Maybe she just thinks I need someone to look after me.
Yeah, I think that it's a classical kind of need to think that your kids have to be kind of taken care of somehow, or be all right, or be like everybody else, or something like that. So you, on this festival where we are at now, you're presenting your latest book, which called Crooked Seed.
Yes.
Who is kind of it is set in a future.
Yes.
Where there's a different situation, but also maybe a situation which we can relate to. Can you try to describe what is the setting of this book, and
sure.
How do you think about this book?
It's set in Cape Town in the very, very near future, so it's 2028. And it's a time of enormous drought. So there's no water in the taps. People have to queue every day to be given their quota of water, which is 3 liters per person. And it is based on what was happening in the Cape Town in the Western Cape several years ago, where we were running out of water and everyone had to knuckle down and stop using water. For example, you didn't flush unless you really, really had to. You save your shower water. You shower with a bucket and you time it no more than 60 seconds. And there was always this threat, we're going to get to day 0, which would be when all the water ran out. And I thought to myself, well, what will that be like if the water does run out? And so it's an imagined future, but not in any kind of really dramatic way. They're not flying cars or things like that.
It's not like a sci-fi.
No.
It is kind of a normal, so to speak, normalities.
Yes.
Future experiment somehow.
Yes. So it's very much like the present, except that there's no water. You have to queue for it.
So somehow it's a radicalization of that situation that we had in Cape Town a few years ago.
Yes.
Which did not really happen.
No.
But here you're trying to experiment with what would have happened if it had been the extreme outcome of that threat was actually real.
And part of that is to illustrate or suggest the thirst of people in South Africa, the thirst for things to get better, the how they feel so parched by the history of our country, that things have been so bad for so long. The government, which, you know, we were all so excited, 1994, it was going to make things so much better, and for a while it was, of course, but since Jacob Zuma became president, you know, things have just gone dramatically downhill with so much corruption and ineptitude and stealing billions that have, you know, that money that should have been improving people's lives. So, you know, there are a lot of things that I touch on just very sort of broadly or vaguely in the novel. I never want to be, I think in my younger years, I think I used to like to read social realism, and I used to, you know, think, okay, a book has to have fiery speeches and, you know,
change the world.
Yeah, and I don't want to do that now. I want to tell a story and reveal a truth, even though it's fiction. It must still reveal a truth, but a truth is never going to be just one thing or one word. It's going to be so complex and complicated, as is our situation in South Africa. And so there are all tiny little parts to it that are, like I say, I touch on briefly in the novel.
So, I mean, you're using this future perspective to create a space where we can imagine things, or where we can think about what we are doing now.
Yes,
or how do you, because it is kind of it's a literary trick, so, or it's a narrative trick, so to speaking, that you jump to the future, and then you create a situation which is slightly different from where the reader is today. Then you can do something there which you would not be able to do in a very realistic novel. Yes. Because then the reader will all the time say, okay, this is not true.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's very interesting. You say it's a narrative trick, because saying that, it makes it seem like it's such a conscious decision, whereas I know that some people do plan very carefully before they write, whereas I'm the opposite. I have a feeling, I have a sense of something, and I don't really know what it is. It's sort of colors and sounds in my mind, and I write by hand. So I'll just sit down and I'll start writing, and I don't necessarily always know where I'm going to end up or what's happening, but it grows. Yeah. And then I close the book, and once I've written a first draft, I put it away, and I don't think about it. I don't let myself think about it. And then I come back and I read what I've written, and I think, what is this mess? And then I've tried to, I guess what the first draft is trying to figure out what am I saying, and then a second draft is still trying to figure it out, but making it a little bit more focused, and then however many drafts it takes. But I write over and over and over, and I do think that that's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that especially young writers, they think, okay, I've been working on this manuscript for a year, it's done. And then they send it off and it gets rejected everywhere, or worse, it gets published, but it's still very much a first draft. They don't understand that a first draft is not the end. It is the beginning of a lot of hard work.
But I also think that if you are in the beginning of being a writer, then you have this need, because you think that if you are published, then you are a writer.
Yes.
So you need to to get over that milestone.
Yes.
To feel good about yourself, and also to convince yourself that you are right. But you are right that there is this impatience.
Yes.
Which is a bad impatience, so to speak, and you can also see it that there's so many terrible manuscripts.
Yes.
And you're actually right that some successful writers are unlucky because they get published for something that maybe should not have been published, because it was fitting in some kind of agenda or some kind of topic that was on the agenda at that time.
Yeah, and I think also, I'm not saying anything bad about genre fiction. I think genre fiction, like crime thrillers, romances, whatever, you get incredibly good writing.
Yeah.
But because genre fiction tends to be more popular, there's more of a demand for it, say on Amazon or in bookshops, and so a lot of the time there is a bit of a churning them out, where you get some very, very bad writing, but it's enormously successful.
Yeah.
And I always find that very frustrating, because I feel like as writers we should be doing our very best to tell something true and to tell it properly. I don't mean that the commas have to be all in the right place or something, but to respect the words, respect the reader by, I read a book recently by, I won't say who, but he's someone who has previously won the Booker Prize.
Yeah.
And he wrote, it was something like, the sentence was something like, her fingers trembled, her hands were trembling. And I thought, that's just weak writing. That's weak. You just because you won a Booker Prize doesn't mean that you can now give up and write something like that.
But sometimes the problem is also the publishing enterprise.
Yeah.
Because if you have a Booker Prize, then a publisher knows that this author will be selling.
Yeah.
Because there's already a branding of the author. And then maybe you're not so critical or not critical enough.
Yeah.
So there can be different kind of. I'm now thinking about was a Danish woman who was doing these safari tours for men who wanted to shoot elephants and shoot other animals. She was sometimes in South Africa and sometimes in Kenya, and then later on she wrote a couple of memoir books. And because she had a reputation on doing these big safari things, then she already had a brand.
Oh, right.
But the books were terrible.
Oh.
And they were really filled of cliches.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really very difficult to read. And somehow, when I was reading it, I felt also sorry somehow, because it was embarrassing.
Yes.
But there was not only one book she wrote, several, 2 or 3 of them.
And were they?
And they sold.
Okay.
Somehow because of her name.
Yes.
And because of her branding, and there was a publisher who wanted to publish them because they would not necessarily be successful literature, but they would sell.
Yes.
And that would be good for in the accounting section of the publishing house.
But I think that's one of the very, very big problems with the publishing industry around the world now, is that, because the publishing industry is facing such financial difficulty, because people aren't reading in the way that they were, and they have to vie with Netflix and Amazon Prime and whatever, all the million things, and they'd much rather scroll through TikTok for an hour than read something. So it is difficult, but the problem is that so much of what is being published is not being chosen by the editors, it's being chosen by the marketing team. They sit at the table and they say, well, that book's not going to make any money, so it might be the best book ever written, but there's no point.
There's a screening before the editing process, so to speak. I also sometimes talk about consumption as contrary to literature. That there's a lot of these books that we're talking about now is not really literature, because they don't have any element of language. They don't have really a good narrative, but they they have kind of some punchlines.
Yeah.
And that is and it is the same thing with other art forms. You have the same situation in film. There's a lot of film
Oh my
who
gosh.
is just entertaining and who doesn't really have any artistic aspiration. So literature has also been hit by that.
I haven't been to the cinema in years because there's nothing to watch. And it's not that there are not good films being made, but certainly here in South Africa, we struggle to have access to them. I do understand that there's streaming things like Netflix and all that, but going to the cinema, it used to be something really special. Now I'm sounding very old, but
but there is this shift also because that the streaming platform has had this influence that you have this very short term. It has to be 1 hour, half an hour, and then it has to roll, and it has to be a series, which is also a way of constructing which kind of narrative and which kind of film can we make.
Yes.
And I mean, I see a lot of documentaries. The documentary is a little more experimental, but even the documentary films has also become framed by commercial needs, because now they have to be 1.5 hours, 2 hours, because otherwise they cannot be shown in a cinema or something. So there is these strange formats who are taking over the way we create things.
And it affects everything, because also, it affects our ability to regard art, so an artistic creation like a film or a book, to regard it critically. And by critically, I don't mean to be, that you don't have to be pessimistic about it or criticize it, but to be able to regard whether it is good in certain ways or not. So even, if you look at the stuff that's being published and being read, and then you look at the reviews being written, so often they're saying, oh, this is a masterpiece, this is wonderful, and you think, have you even read the book? This is not a masterpiece at all. Or do you just not know anymore what a masterpiece is, that because we've become so lacking in masterpieces?
But I also think, because sometimes I talk with people who make a living on being a critic, and there's also a very big workload. So actually, the only reviews and critics I read, which is interesting, is kind of in the freelance sector. It is people who are saying, okay, I go away from the institutions, I do it on my own, but that also has a financial implication, because then he will only or she will only write a few of them, and it will also be difficult to get them published. Because, so there is also something about the whole reviewing and critic system, because the literary critics is a very big part of how literature develops. And no matter if you like critics or not, then it's part of that energy. So if the critics gets bad, then the literature will also get bad, and vice versa.
Yeah, we can't learn. We can't learn how to tell stories better or engage with subjects better if we're not acknowledging that is not being done in a satisfactory way. And what I also feel is that we need to be, as writers or artists of any kind, we need to be our own critics as well. Be first and foremost, that you, for example, when you've written that first draft, that you're able to look at it critically and say, wow, this is terrible. Now I'm going to rewrite it in a way that it can be better. And then again, look at it critically and say, okay, I'm getting closer, but, and because, once the book's published, it's too late. You can't change anything.
No, then it's there. Of course.
And
in Denmark, maybe they told you when you were in Denmark, but there has been this development of a lot of small self-publishing enterprising. One thing is, a lot of small publishers has popped up, which is not really, which which runs on Connemara and which is not financially stable. But then there's also a lot of both unknown authors and known authors who simply publish their own books.
Oh, really?
Because they are tired of these discussions. But it also has this, they are tired of the discussion of can't get their books published. But the problem somehow is also that then there's no one to read your book.
Yes.
If you do it yourself. And then where is the, because of course you have a point that you can be your own critic, but it is also very fragile to be your own critic, because can I really be my own critic? Because there's a lot of things I can, then it requires that I have some colleagues who are very honest.
Yes, that's what everyone needs. They need someone.
I mean, so the problem is that with this self-publishing enterprise is that then we are just doing it ourselves. Yeah. And it also happened to the music industry that a lot of upcoming artists, they just publish on YouTube.
Yes.
And then what is then happening with the music or with the literature? Because then it is not dictated by financial interest, but it's dictated by who likes it.
Yeah.
And I mean, and the ordinary reader is not necessarily a good critic.
No.
Because there's all kind of different reasons why I like something. Yeah. That is not a discussion of literature. That is not a reflection of what is good literature. So there's a lot of different problems, I think, related to literature who can explain where we are.
Yes, I think you're right. There's a lot. I'm just thinking, LitHub on Instagram, they post, I think once a week, they post classic books or famous books that have got one-star reviews, and then they show what people have said, and it's really refreshing, because they'll say, I know this is a classic, but it was so boring, or I just couldn't, and I love that, because that's also allowing us to break the chains that hold us to, the old canon of what was considered a good book, and we don't have to, love Moby Dick or whatever. I'm just thinking of that one because it was recently on.
Yeah. Because that is true. Also, that is this kind of, it is also kind of a manipulation of the classics. Yeah. Because the classics come from somewhere, and it has been structuring our way of thinking about the world and also about literature, and of course that is also a problem, so to speak. And of course that has been, this party has been opened up long time ago, but then we get a lot of other stigmas on literature, which is, I guess, a democratic platform we now have somehow mixed with commercial interests. Okay, thank you very much for this conversation. Is there anything else you would like to say? You are welcome.
I don't think any of my books are available in Danish, but if it ever is, please buy it and read it.
A lot of them are probably also, the English versions are often accessible. But
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. You have listened to a bonus track by Foreignness and Friendship. If you have built up an appetite for more, then you can follow us on thewhiteafricanblogspot.com and walk in our footsteps by stepping into In My Footstep WordPress.com. We broadcast new episodes of our radio show every first Tuesday of the month, available on your preferred platforms.